All right, let's talk about an empire, but not one forged in cities with walls and palaces. No, this one was born on the vast, open plains. We're diving into the story of how a scattered group of nomads completely redrew the map of the world and built the largest single land empire in all of human history. And I'm not kidding, that's no exaggeration. We're talking about a stretch of land from Korea all the way to Ukraine, from the frozen plains of Siberia down to the South China Sea. The scale is just, it's hard to even wrap your head around. And it all started on the East Asian steppe. So to make sense of this massive story, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll look at the world before the Mongols came crashing in. We'll see the rise of the Great Khan himself, watch how this empire was forged, explore the surprisingly peaceful period inside of it, and then finally cover its collapse and incredible legacy. Okay, so let's set the scene. We're dialing the clock back to the 12th century, way before this giant empire was even a thought. The East Asian steppe was a world unto itself, a harsh, beautiful landscape that shaped a really unique way of life. You know, life on the steppe was full of contrasts. On one hand, it was this domestic, pastoral life, people moving with the seasons, living in these portable felt tents, and interestingly, women held a lot of real power, managing the camps and trade. But on the other hand, it was a world of constant, brutal warfare. Men were absolute masters of fighting on horseback, and the different nomadic groups, each led by its own Khan, were pretty much always fighting each other. It was a seriously fractured world. But then, out of all this chaos, one person shows up who's going to change, well, everything. A young aristocrat who wouldn't just lead his people, but would totally revolutionize what it even meant to be a Khan. His name was Temujin. And even though he was born into a noble family, his dad was murdered, and he was basically left for dead, growing up in extreme poverty. You know, that kind of tough start forces you to get smart fast. He learned how to make alliances, but more importantly, he started thinking in a way that no other leader on the steppe did. And his leadership ideas were just game-changing. First, in a society that was all about who your family was, he promoted soldiers based purely on skill and loyalty. It was a real meritocracy. Second, instead of the leader hoarding all the loot from battles, he shared it evenly with his soldiers, which made them fiercely loyal. And then, here's the masterstroke. When he conquered other nomads, he didn't leave them in their own groups. He scattered them throughout his own army, completely breaking up their old allegiances and making it impossible for them to rise up against him. This new way of doing things didn't just work, it was absolutely unstoppable. By the year 1206, Temujin had done what everyone thought was impossible. He united all the warring peoples of the steppe. And it was then that he was given a new title, one that would echo for centuries, Chinggis Khan, a name you probably know as Genghis Khan. So with the nomads finally united, Chinggis Khan looked outward. Now, you might think this was all just about power and land grabs, right? Well, for the Mongols, it was way deeper than that. This was a mission, they believed, straight from the heavens. See, the Mongols were shamanists, and their most important god was Tenggeri, the eternal sky god. Chinggis Khan truly believed that he was chosen by Tenggeri, that he was the instrument of the sky god's will on earth. And what was that will? To bring the entire world under his rule. And this belief, well, it created this really brutal but really effective logic for their campaigns. If you surrendered to the Mongols, you might be okay. But if you fought back, you weren't just fighting an army, you were defying the will of God. And for that, the punishment was death. This idea justified destruction on a scale that's just hard to imagine. After Chinggis Khan died in 1227, his family, what they called the Golden Lineage, just kept going. And the speed is just breathtaking. In the 1230s, boom, they conquer Central Asia and the Russian princes. By 1241, they've smashed European armies in Hungary and Poland. In the 1250s, they sack Baghdad, the center of the Islamic world. And by 1279, they take southern China. I mean, in just a few decades, they had built an empire of truly staggering size. Okay, so with a reputation for being that brutal, you'd probably expect life inside the Mongol Empire to be pretty terrible, right? Constant fear, harsh rule. But what actually happened is one of the biggest paradoxes in history. Yeah, because the story gets a whole lot more complicated here. It wasn't just about war and destruction. Once the fighting was over, the Mongols turned out to be incredibly practical and effective rulers. The period that followed their conquests is actually known as the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. So how on earth did they pull that off?
Well, for starters, they were brilliant administrators who didn't want to micromanage. They left local governments pretty much alone and used local officials who knew the area. They were also remarkably tolerant of different religions. As long as you prayed for the Khan, they didn't care who your god was. And they had a real eye for talent, moving the best engineers and artisans all across their empire to spread new ideas and skills. For the first time ever, a huge chunk of Eurasia was politically unified.
And this unification had a massive, massive effect on trade. Just think about the Silk Road. Before the Mongols, it was a total mess, a patchwork of dangerous routes. Traveling it was slow and super risky. But under the Mongols, it was a whole new ballgame. They made it safe. They set up this amazing network of relay posts with fresh horses, making travel and communication faster than ever. Trade just exploded. And this new global network, it led to some incredible fusion. I mean, check this out. To make gold brocade, a super luxury fabric, you needed silk from China, gold from Tibet, and weavers from Baghdad. And the empire brought them all together. That iconic blue and white porcelain, that's Chinese pottery skills combined with blue cobalt dye from Iran. And, maybe most important of all, gunpowder experts from China were moved west, changing warfare forever. But, as is so often the case in history, this incredible era of unity just couldn't last forever. And ironically, the very thing that held the empire together, the family of Chinggis Khan, would be the very thing that tore it all apart. So, you remember the golden lineage, right? The divine right to rule was passed down through Chinggis Khan's family, which gave them incredible power. But here's where the cracks start to show. The system had a huge problem baked right in. The rules for who exactly was supposed to take over were dangerously unclear. And this, right here, was the fatal flaw. Unlike a lot of kingdoms where the crown just goes to the oldest son, here any brother, uncle, or cousin could make a claim to be the next great Khan. Now, the idea was maybe to find the best leader, but in reality, it just created these vicious, non-stop rivalries that completely destabilized the empire. It all finally came to a head in the 1260s. These family fights boiled over into a full-blown civil war. The grandsons of Chinggis Khan went to war with each other, and the unified Mongol Empire was shattered for good. But from the ashes of that war, 4 separate empires, or khanates, rose up, and each one left a huge mark on history. You had the Yuan dynasty in China, which led to a golden age of culture and science there. The Ilkhanate in Iran gave us amazing new architecture and Persian art. The Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia was the origin of later empire builders like Babur, who founded the Mongol Empire. And over in Eastern Europe, the Golden Horde ruled for centuries and completely shaped the future of Russia. So you see, even after it fractured, the impact was immense. The unified empire itself didn't last all that long, but its scale and its influence were so profound that when it comes to sheer world domination, the Mongols really did leave a legacy that is unmatched even today. Which really leaves us with this one big question to think about. For all of its violence and all of its destruction, the Mongol Empire created a more connected world than had ever existed before. It was brutal and it was brief, but by tying East and West together so tightly, did this short-lived, world-shattering empire actually change the course of history forever.